Recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare.
Noted. No.
Can we note the ongoing actions arising from previous meetings of the committee and the additional correspondence sent?
Noted.
Can we now move on to our main item of business, and I'd like to welcome our two guests. Firstly, Deputy Assistant Commissioner Adia Delacan, who for Operations and Performance at the Metropolitan Police Service, and Chief Superintendent Colin Wingrove, who is the OCU Commander for the MO7 Task Force at the Metropolitan Police Service. I am, first of all, welcome to you both. Now, I am going to ask you a favour. If you could not speak in acronyms, please. If you could actually, and forgive me if I actually stop you and pull you back and say, could you explain what that means? Because I know you all know what it means, but the rest of us don't, and certainly members of the public probably won't as well. OK, so we're going to start with questions. We're not specifically asking anyone. I think it's up to you both to decide who's going to answer. But also, if one of you answers and somebody, the other has something to add, then please go ahead. And members, if you feel that your question has already been answered, please restrain yourselves from asking it again. So, how would you describe the role of the Territorial Support Group, the TSG, within the Met?
So, Chair, if I take that question on, pass on to Colin as and when, if that is OK. Chair, if I may, I'll just start off by saying that the Territorial Support Group is part of what we consider to be the task force, which is an operational command unit within the Met. We define units in that way. They're either operational command units or they're basic command units, which refers to local boroughs. Really, the task force itself, which the Territorial Support Group comes under, consists of a number of other sort of specialist units. And I thought, just for context, if I explain what they are. So our dog support unit also exists within the task force, so that means within the same operational command unit. The mounted branch, which is also another specialist function that exists within the Met, is within the task force. The Marine Support Unit is based within that same unit. The MPS Dive Team is based within that unit. The Drone Team, which has the drone capacity for the organisation, sits within the task force. And the Interceptor units, which are the traffic units that specifically target towards crimes that are linked to motor vehicles and people using motor vehicles, is also embedded within that unit. So that makes up the task force, which is the Met's sort of specialist units, operations units. And what you will find lots of the time is that wherever the Territorial Support Unit go in terms of trying to tackle a problem, you might find the mounted branch with them, the dog support unit with them. You might find drones, you might find also. So they don't work in isolation. But dare I also stress that because they are a unit that are centrally based but deliver effects locally, every time they do a local operation, they engage with the local BCUs to make sure they understand the context as well before actually any deployment takes place. But we will probably get to a bit more detail on that later. The Territorial Support Group, if I may, it's a bit of a mouthful. If I may refer to it as a TSG from now on, if that is okay.
It, I think that's fine.
So the TSG was formed in 1987. One of its functions was to deliver effect in the public order space, really. It was also to deliver an effect in the crime space, to deal with major incidents, major events, critical incidents, and the unit is also trained in chemical, biological, radiological and neurological responses as well. So they are part of the response for the Met. And dare I say, during the Olympics in 2012, they were trained to carry firearms because they were the contingency for the Met as well. So what you can see is quite a specialist unit based across 4 bases in London. So you have a base at Chadwell Heath, there is a base over at Catford, there's a base in Larkhall Lane, and also there's a base in Alperton. They work 24/7, 365 days of a year. And the role, particularly of the TSG, is to support other specialist units in delivering effect, to support local policing in neighbourhoods in delivering effect. And I won't get tired of stressing, they don't do that in isolation. They understand the context of the area they're going to. They link in with the local BCUs in various different ways and to deliver an effect there. The Territorial Support Group has a basic sort of budgeted workforce target of 589 officers. It currently has an establishment which currently exists at 510. You could say they're slightly short, and there's a number of reasons for that. In relation to how they deploy to local boroughs, what happens is that boroughs will bid for them through a coordinated tasking process that is chaired by a senior colleague with a focus to deal with a particular crime in a particular area aligned to a number of other resources and units, so as a part of a tactic. So the TSG is not a tactic, it's not a function that exists in isolation. It exists alongside quite a number of other functions I've just described. Just to give you an example of some of the things they do, and I started that at the top of my conversation. They are regarded as the Commissioner's Reserve. So they are on duty. They run 4 shifts across the course of the day, an early shift which starts around 7 o'clock in the morning, a middle shift which is, a late shift which is at 2 p.m, a middle shift at 6 p.m, and then a night duty shift, so round the clock. Whatever is over and above the capability and capacity of a local BCU, normally you will get a call out to the TSG asking them to come. And so things like an armed person behind a locked door, that could be a combination of the TSG and the firearms colleagues dealing with that, depending on what the best tactic is to deliver the effect that we are looking for. So that's the Commissioner's Reserve. They're also trained to the highest level in public order. So when you have events that we feel are likely to present a significant challenge in terms of violence, you will find the TSG at the front of that queue, trying to deliver the right effect in a proportionate way for Londoners and for London. One of the roles they do day in, day out is support the BCUs, and I'm sure Colin will talk about some of the recent results that they have gained and really supporting local BCUs. So they go into local BCUs having been bid for by the local BCUs to come and help out with a problem recently around robbery, around antisocial behaviour, around crime, around violence against women and girls. They will be tasked in a particular way into a particular area to deliver that, and they'll deliver it alongside the boroughs as well. They also work alongside colleagues from CT, from counter-terrorism as well. So if they have to deliver an effect between to conduct an executive action, you will probably see the TSG assisting alongside other colleagues, but lots of the time first through the door to secure the suspect that needs securing within that premises. So this I think last calendar year I think they delivered around 3,500 proactive deployments into BCUs, which I think is quite impressive, around robbery, violence, knife crime, violence against women and girls. And across sort of the 4 quadrants of London, any one time, as we sit here now, they are probably delivering an effect in some areas, really around robbery and violence. But Colin would talk a little bit more about that. in deploying to local BCUs, the first thing they will do is integrate first. They have to. So they spend some time, sometimes a week, sometimes two, getting to understand the local BCU, the context, because it is different wherever you go. You know, each borough has a uniqueness about it. Each estate has a uniqueness about it. Each area has a uniqueness about it. So it is quite important that in delivering effect, we don't leave
Okay,
a
we
deficit
are
behind.
going to be asking you some questions about that later on.
I'm sure you are. So I suppose that hopefully, Chair and members, that gives you a little bit of a flavour of what the TSG deliver for on behalf of London.
Chief Superintendent, did you want to add anything to that?
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. I think, you know, my reflection, I've been at the TSG task force now as the OCU commander for about a year, and previously I was a BCU commander in Central South, so Lambeth and Southwark. And I think, you know, one of the things that has struck me about my time there and coming into task force and the range of capabilities and thinking about New Met for London and our drive to increase community crime fighting and strengthening local neighbourhoods is the role that our specialist
Chair,
capabilities...
I'm really sorry to interrupt. I'm having slight difficulty hearing you. Could you move the whole of the microphone slightly closer?
Of course. Hopefully this is a...
really appreciate that. Sorry to interrupt.
No, not at all. And I think one of the more observations is with the New Met for London and the opportunities that brings and the importance that brings for London in terms of strengthening community policing and strengthening our approach to community crime fighting is how we deploy our capabilities such as TSG and the others to support local policing. As a BCU commander, I was a beneficiary of that support coming into areas such as in South East 1, which was a robbery hotspot at the time, and seeing the effect working together with the local teams that can have in reducing robbery offending. And so I think, you know, we're trying to ensure that we always work in tandem with local teams, local BCUs. You'll be aware perhaps of the new, it's been in place for about a year now, so each borough now has its own superintendent. We know that investment in neighbourhood policing, so it's how we can add to that support and how we really understand local communities and the local problems to be really precise about our deployments. And I know we'll probably touch on some of those examples through questions, but and I think it's, you know, there's always real opportunities, and I think from the you know, the tactical excellence that we see through task force, it's also combining with the higher standards of professionalism and training as well, and that close working together. So I think they're my sort of themes. I think as a sort of new, not so new now, OCU commander for task force, and hopefully through the questioning we'll be able to draw out some of the examples to help demonstrate that.
You talked about the fact that the TSG has now been there for a number of decades. Could you tell us how the role of the TSG has changed, if at all, over the last decade, and what impact this has had? And also, could you touch on on the main challenges faced by the TSG as well in that context?
So a number of things have changed. The TSG at one point had 5 bases. It's now down to 4. Really, the TSG on its first inception was focused significantly on public order. Now it's focused more on delivering in neighbourhoods. So focused on neighbourhood crime. Really through the tasking process. That is quite different. I think the training received by the TSG and a lot of our units across the piece now is different to what it used to be. So we talk to officers about tactical deployments. We talk to them about the statute and the legal requirements, but also we have now a real conversation in terms of procedural justice and how they do their job. So fairness, respect, giving other people a voice to understand, explaining why we're in a particular area. So that is different. On a tactical level, we deploy differently now. So you will find when TSG are conducting their patrols, so to speak, there will always be a supervisor with them to explain, to engage with people that may be looking, or to engage with the person that is being dealt with, or the people that are being dealt with. So that's different. They now go for a cycle of training. I think it's every 5 weeks now. So training is intensive, really so, and just to make sure that they perfect their art. And when I say perfect their art, it's not just about being able to run for X amount of time, but actually being able to deploy in the right way, in the way London wants us to deploy, really. So there are lots of differences. There are some challenges. Crime is more complex now. And we have to prioritise where we put the TSG in some of our most challenging places, challenging hotspots, and really, so that's a real challenge. I used to be a base chief, so I used to run one of those 4 areas. I was based out of Larkhall, and when I was dealing then, you didn't have the social media challenges that you have now. And look. Please do not mistake that for me saying we don't want scrutiny. Scrutiny is welcome because it makes us better. But it does present some challenges in terms of how social media reporting impacts on officers and an officer's mental well-being. Not physical well-being, but mental well-being. So there are a whole lot of different challenges in this space now, really, dare I say.
And does TSG have the resources that it needs to meet the challenging demands that you've referred to?
So Chair, in the interest of candour and quite being open with you here, I think your question is saying, can we deliver the effect that we would like to deliver for London? The answer is yes, we can and we will. But the Commissioner has been quite clear with the public, with politicians. He has been quite clear, even in recent days, that we've had to make some difficult choices, and difficult choices means we have to prioritise. So we're prioritising the right way in order to deliver the effect that London wants us to deliver. So the simple answer to your question is yes, we can, with some difficulty due to the budgetary challenges that we face.
Thank you. Assembly Member Roberts, you had a question.
Thank you. Yes, I mean it sort of follows on from that particular issue, and given that you have such a wide and diverse range of responsibilities and duties, are there any specific ones which you think would be better served by being handled by a different part of the Met? It's like the reverse of Desert Island Discs. If you're rushing to catch everything else, but one can be swept away by the waves, which would it be? So
I would say crime is quite complex, as you would agree, and we have to prioritise as we have been doing. So I said the TSG are the highest trained in terms of public order, but below the TSG we have a significant number, just close to, coming close to 3,500, if not slightly over 3,500 public order trained officers that are based on boroughs. So the TSG alone are not the ones delivering the effect around public order. I just say at the top of this conversation that in tackling crime, in neighbourhood crime, we work alongside the boroughs as well and other specialist units, depending on what the nature of the crime is. So we're not doing this alone. What I'm saying to you is that we are now quite adept at adapting, combining, utilising, and not just us. There are some operations that we'll go into with our close sort of blue light partners and non-blue light partners and deliver the best effect. So we will work with anyone in order to deliver the best effect for London. So what this challenging time suggests to us that actually we have to work more closely together with all areas of business internally and also partners externally, and that's what you will see us doing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Garbett.
Thank you. I guess my question follows on nicely and goes a slightly step further, just to think about times where the TSG has been called to things that maybe other responses or, you know, isn't an appropriate response. So I've heard that the TSG have been sent to local protests rather than the kind of bigger central London ones, especially if there hasn't been a history of violence. Because I think when you said before that public order, the TSG are often called when there's kind of, risk of significant violence. So I just wondered how those decisions are made for kind of local protests. You know, I'm not talking about the big central London ones. I'm talking about local borough, maybe outside a town hall. And whether that's the appropriate response.
So a number of things to talk about. In order to answer your question, if I may, I'll just talk you through the process we go through before you get a deployment in itself is important. So members of my team, so a different part of my team now will assess events throughout the week, over months, what is coming up. They will then assess whether it is to be dealt with locally or centrally, and based on understanding the information, understanding the risks and issues, and the likely issues to come up. So that's they'll base it around a risk assessment and then make a decision. But the fact of the matter is, once that decision is made, it doesn't mean that that decision is set in stone. So what is a local protest can then turn out to be more complex. The scale of that protest could increase rather significantly. And the Guild commander who is sitting away from all of this has to make a decision on whether that local protest now becomes a centrally owned protest and deploy, and then they make a decision on what assets are to be deployed. So I can't answer your question directly without knowing the incident that you're talking about, but I can give you a sense of how we would tend to deploy officers on a risk-based assessment.
And that's interesting to understand that difference between the local and the central. And then within that, would there be a discussion with the people organising the protest around kind of, could they have more stewards and things like that, rather, or is the risk... Yeah, it's interesting to understand what you mean by the risk assessment.
So we would. We would always we adopt a no surprises approach to policing and to protesting in particular. What that really means is that we have a department that oversees protests in terms of engaging and getting a sense of what is the nature of the protest, how long is it going to be, where is it going to be, what location is going to be at, how many stewards are they going to provide. And we will advise and guide as best as we can just to make sure that we get the right outcome. There are protests, there are quite a number of protests across London that require no policing whatsoever, because by their nature, there are no issues for policing to deal with within those protests. And that happens quite frequently across London.
Yeah, because I think the concern that I've heard from local protest groups or local organisations is that sometimes the presence of the TSG can feel like it inflames and escalates the situation. So I don't know if that's feedback you've had from local groups around the presence.
So it's what I want to I'm glad you raised that concern. So what I wouldn't sit here before you and say that we are without blemish sometimes. So you know. But what I will say though is that the TSG deliver a very good effect. So because they are public order trained, we teach them to de-escalate, to have conversations, and really, we don't always need our batons and our cuffs to do a job. I think the conversation with people is the first. So they do this very, very well. And I'm not saying we don't get it wrong sometimes, but I am saying that we do get it right a significant amount of the time, and those officers are quite good. So, and the other point to make here is that before you become a TSG officer, you are a local borough officer for a significant number of years before you apply to join and get. And we do have a waiting list for the TSG. I think there are 50 people waiting at the moment, and you go through a rigorous interview process in order to get through the TSG. Really. So they have been local borough officers. A lot of them understand the local challenges. And if they cannot speak to people, which they can do and they do it very well, they're not there to inflame the situation. I do say they have to understand the context in which they're working, which they try and do all of the time, and then deploy alongside knowing the context to deliver the kind of effect that London wants us to deliver. So I hear your concern, I'm not saying they're without blemish, but I am saying that they go there with good intentions, and a significant amount of the time they do get it right. But when we do get it wrong, it is right that we stop, review, reflect, make good where we have got things wrong. And we do that a lot. Every single TSD deployment is debriefed by the supervisor. And if it's a deployment that has resulted in some feedback from members of the public, it will probably be debriefed by the base inspector or chief.
Have you got a brief example of where that's happened, where you feel like it's gone wrong and you've debriefed and made a change?
I wouldn't want to talk about individual events here, but it's happened. It happened when I was a base chief many years ago. There was a case in question not so long ago that I sat down with TSG colleagues and had a conversation to make sure that we had reflected, learned from it, and that's in the last sort of month or so. But what it would be. It won't be right for me to discuss individual, but I can assure you that I've been personally involved in some of those debriefs. It's not just local deployments. We debrief larger, like the one that you saw. We will have a debrief. I'm referring to if my memory serves me correctly, it was one of the VE Day events where we would debrief what went well, and we do that on a daily basis.
Great, thank you. Back to you, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you. Assembly Member Hall.
Yeah, if I can pick up on something you said that one of the things you teach the TSG officers is respect, and I've seen that myself when I've been with them. But can I ask you what your opinion is? If one of your officers is up against a knife-wielding youngster, literally in his hands, and he happens to swear at that person, now I think the majority of the public think that that's perfectly acceptable. Do you think it's acceptable that an officer for swearing at a knife-wielding person to put that knife down, do you think it's acceptable that they should lose their job?
So I'll answer your question. So, look, it is my professional view. So, not my opinion. It is my professional view that. When we are conducting ourselves, we should conduct ourselves aligned to our values, the values of our organisation, which talks about respect for the people we're dealing with, irrespective of the circumstances. Okay, so that's the first thing I would say. I wouldn't want to comment on whether one loses his job or not, because with every incident you have to take into account the context. Really, whilst I'm not here to criticise any officers. We have, very recently, all officers have been through a new Met for London training, and they're going through it, and supervisors have been through it, where we talk about our values. We talk about our values a lot because we have to, regardless of the circumstances, they do get challenging for officers out on the street. What I'm saying to you is that we have to conduct ourselves aligned to our values, aligned to the principles of the organisation, and align ourselves to what the public expects of us. And I'm not saying it doesn't get difficult sometimes. It absolutely does. But I'm not going to comment on whether people should lose their jobs or not, because you don't know the context. Each job is very different.
But I would say to you, I think the public are far more behind you than
Assembly Member Hall. I think we're veering off the subject here now. Assembly Member Bailey.
I'd have to say that your values should respect the safety and the welfare and the mental state of your officers front and centre. Someone losing their job over swearing in a situation like that is utterly ridiculous. TSG headcount has been reduced since 2016. Why is this? And are efforts being made to resolve the TSG officer numbers? Now, I know there's the obvious thing around what you've made comments earlier on about what the Commissioner said about resource, but is there other issues as well? And in the competitive environment that is resource, where did the TSG lie? Are you top of the list or bottom?
That's a very good question. So, as an organisation, in general, our numbers have been reducing over years, and you've heard the leader of my organisation say that loud and clear, which means we've had to prioritise. And dare I say, every aspect of the Met has had to face a tough choice during this recent time. So, really. What we do also in reaching that decision, and board members have to reach that decision, is we assess the risk making the decisions that we have to make. So what's the impact likely to be? So there are choices to be made. And whether the TSG sits, what I would say is we assess the risk of cutting numbers across whatever department against the commitments we've made to London and the impact. We are looking a lot around how can we enable the front line better. So TSG are frontline officers. So they are part of the priority in delivering for neighbourhoods and delivering for the people of London. So they'll be high in the priority of trying to make sure that we maintain the numbers as best as we can. But that doesn't make them immune from us making tough choices as well.
Okay, that's an acceptable answer, I imagine.
Colin wanted to add something.
Please do, Colin.
Yes, I just wondered if I could just add a little bit more as well. So I think the other thing links back to an earlier question around what are the things that have changed over time. And so I think our greater use of technology, for example, means that with the officers that we have, we can do more and be more effective. So we use CCTV much more than we had done before, live facial recognition. We now have the body-worn video. We're trialling things with drone technology. We're working more closely because we know, and I know personally as a BCU commander, how important it is to work with your local BCU. So we're working more closely with our BCU colleagues, developing intelligent information, speaking to local communities to find out what are the problems that we can address, so we can be more precise with what we do, with the effect that we have. And every day and every week I get examples of how that effect makes a difference in local communities with numbers of arrests. So in 2024, for example, we made nearly 5,000 arrests out of 3,500 deployments, so which is outstanding in terms of the delivery in local communities. So I think we have, and as Mr. Delecan has mentioned earlier, we've got about 50 officers waiting to join us, which is great. And so over the next few months, hopefully, we'll see more people joining us. But at the same time, we're doing an awful lot with new technology, new techniques, and working more closely with local BCUs and local communities to have a greater effect and impact locally.
Thank you. As a layperson, I would argue that the TSG is one of the more important units. To my mind, I could be wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, you do the crime fighting. A lot of the sort of high-profile things that are bothering London, robbery, knife crime, we see the TSG intervening in that process. So we would argue you should be pretty high up the list on who receives funding or not. Bearing that in mind in what you've just said around the use of technology, has this reduction in numbers lowered your ability to carry out your tasks, or do you feel like you've mitigated it in other ways?
So going back to sort of kind of earlier response, really, we've got the resources we need to deliver the service in London and provide Commissioners Reserve and that crime-fighting capability, working with local boroughs, working with specialist crime, working with other parts of the Met to deliver our priorities, deliver New Met for London. So we have those resources. I think what I'm saying is with technology we can do more than we have done previously with what we have. And whilst there is, as described earlier, we've got some vacancies, we will continue to work to bring new people in over the coming months. So hopefully we'll see more people coming to join TSG. But as we currently sit here today, we can deliver all of our capabilities within London, and we can do more when we have more people.
So, notwithstanding that all senior officers want more and more and more and more, you would argue that you have the correct resource, both financially and with body power, man and woman power, to carry out the tasks that you've been tasked with by the Commissioner. Is that your contention?
Look, Betty, if you give me more money, I can do even more. We can do even more than we are currently doing. We are having to make tough choices because we've got to cut according to our size, and we're having to prioritise in doing that. So as it stands now, we are optimising what we have in order to deliver the best effect for London in terms of prioritisation, which is neighbourhoods and neighbourhood focused, whilst managing serious organised crime in a separate space. So we've got many priorities to manage on behalf of London, but we're optimising the best use. And as Colin said, we're using every bit of technology that we can use. We're using partners' energy as well But look, if you say you're going to give me some more money, then I'll absolutely take it off you and do even more for London with that, Colin and I and the TSG.
To be very clear, if it was my decision, I would give you more, considerably more money. Chair, back to you.
Thank you. Assemblymember Best.
Thank you, and morning both. I wanted to come with a follow-up on the numbers around staffing. And obviously, while the numbers have gone down since 2016, there's been an increase at sergeant level, so it's almost like at that mid-level there's been an increase while the others have fallen. Is that a purposeful choice? Is there a reason why that decision's been made?
So I think what we've seen is differences in our supervision ratio and they're met over time. And I think now we're working towards a supervision ratio where we have 1 sergeant for 7 PCs, and so that's where we're working to at the moment. And that fits in with the sort of model that TSG in this case work really effectively with the different units and the different teams. And I think supervision is really, really important. I think that ratio is a good ratio in terms of supervising the officers, so making sure we've got a sergeant available out on the streets with the teams, working alongside when they're dealing with deployments, providing that leadership. With the sergeants we've currently got, we've also the ability to make sure that we're dip sampling and reviewing body-worn video, for example, to make sure we're conducting stop and search, for example, and other crime types in the way that we should be, in the way that our officers have been trained, and a whole range of other sort of supervisory and leadership things that they get involved with. So I think at the moment, again, we're working towards that supervision ratio now, and it's something that's common across the organisation.
Okay, thank you. I think Assemblymember Garbett asked the question I was going to ask, but to come back to involvement with local boroughs and the process for attendance, I would just wonder, going back to the evaluation you were making earlier, how is it even possible to get that right? As somebody that goes to the town hall often, local town hall, there's protests where I think that's going to attract a large number of people, and maybe there's 5 people there. And there's some protests where I think nobody's going to be interested in that, and you have hundreds and hundreds of people turn up. And that's from having, the information of seeing the Facebook post locally, Twitter, getting the emails through. So how can you even begin to make those evaluations and get them right? It's a hard job, surely.
Thanks for acknowledging it. It is a hard job, but we do a number of things. So one, we keep very good records. We can't backtrack and see has a protest of that nature happened in that particular place. When did it last happen? What happened in relation to that protest? And really, who are the people that would generally attend, and what is their general nature? Really, what is the history of that kind of protest? We will also use our intelligence sources, as you would expect, to make an assessment. We would link in with local and national colleagues as well. And for the people who assess, and Colin and I are one of those, we would use professional judgment, and mostly around the table combined, there is a significant amount of professional judgment around that, really. And part of that is also speaking to the organiser, really, because the organiser will tell us what kind of protest a lot of the time that they're expecting. And sometimes when they have concerns, they tell us that they actually have concerns and work with us to deliver the protest. So, yes, it is. It's not an exact science, but we do our best to make sure that we deliver the effect. And look, what's the best kind of protest I would like to have? Protest that requires no policing whatsoever. And numbers don't necessarily dictate how many officers that you require to protest. You could have small numbers, about 50, and you require a significant policing response. You could have numbers of thousands and thousands, and it requires a minor policing response. I personally, when I was still deploying on the streets, have led close to 5,000 people from A to B with me and probably about 6 other officers, because there was no going to be. And there are some people, there's some protests in the thousands that actually look after themselves. So it's not an exact science, but you gauge it based on what happened previously, what's the nature of the people, and what are they protesting for or against. Is there a counter-protest? And a whole host of things comes into this, really.
Thanks. And one of the other things I want to say is, what work do you do with boroughs around their civic centres and areas where protests happen? I've noticed, obviously, Waltham Forest being an example, there's been a big development at the Civic Centre, and now protests can be managed much more easily. Other places in London, the civic centres don't allow for protest, as peaceful as they may be, to not be unobstructive. Are you working perhaps with those boroughs or civic centres to see what they can do to help have more manageable protests?
I wouldn't. I would say we work with local boroughs and local partners all of the time. Specifically, what we do with local civic centres, if they ask for an assessment in terms of protest, we'll give them an assessment, a professional assessment by people who are more qualified than myself to do. And there have been times in recent times where we've given assessments of what the impact of protest is likely to be, and there are a number of different ways of doing that. So yes, I couldn't give you any specific examples right now, but a couple of months ago there were times when people had come to us around specific areas and specific centres where we would generally give some advice.
Thanks. And the last update we have is from 2011 on this question, so it may well have changed. But back in 2011, the Met said that the TSG would be committed to working alongside a borough safer neighbourhood team for 3 days every 5 weeks. Is that still the current practice? So
I think the TSG work in local boroughs far more than the way you've just described. That they are there. They are there now. I know the last tasking they were tasked. In fact, I've got some of the data here, so not to miss. Yeah, if you let Colin do it, because they are in local boroughs as we speak, working alongside neighbourhood teams as we speak.
Yes, so locally there'll be bid for by the local boroughs, so we'll be regularly working out every single day. At the moment, they've been working in East area around robbery problems in Barking, having really good successes. Supporting local borough there. They've been working in Central East, so Tower Hamlets and Hackney. They regularly work in Westminster because there's a high volume footfall of robbery problems there. So every single day they've been in one part of London. And where the bases are, they do different events, open days and things of that nature at the different bases where they're located. And something that hasn't been touched on yet, but in terms of community engagement, they go to a lot of community engagement events, community monitoring groups, local schools, supporting local BCUs with that engagement. So last year they did 158 different engagement events as well. So there'll be a presence for TSG and other parts of Task Force locally every day. But it has changed a bit from that definition, but every single day there's somewhere there'll be a TSG in the local community somewhere.
Okay. Do you think it'd be worth updating perhaps that statement, or just to have a clearer idea of what the goal is, perhaps?
We'll take that away.
Yeah, thanks.
We'll take that away.
And the final question, just around, and you mentioned, Colin, the bidding. Over a month period, say, or annual if it's easier, or a quarter, how many bids would come in from BCUs, and how many would the TSG be able to support?
So it's controlled. We have something called a corporate tasking process. So BCUs will put a bid in for support around a local crime problem that they're dealing with. And that number can vary. So some months you may get 5 or 6, some months you may get more. Often the BCUs have a conversation with Task Force and TSG in advance to help shape that bid. And then it really then comes down to where, because it's a pan-London and corporate asset and process, where the threat, harm and risk is in London to deploy TSG or mounted or dogs or the Marine unit and others, and the interceptors currently. So it will vary month on month, but typically every single unit will be tasked with something. We'll have an overarching task for a particular area where multiple units may attend. So if they're Commissioners Reserve, for example, they may, because they cover all of London, to respond to call-outs and major incidents, they'll have a default tasking, which would be in an area such as Westminster or SE1 or in Barking and Dagenham or wherever it happens to be, and each different team will go there. And then some teams will get a core tasking, so they'll spend much more time. So there's been a lot of work recently for clear hold build, so many boroughs are doing a lot of work around that strategy in terms of improving crime and safety in local communities. And so some of our TSG units have been assigned to, say, North West, for example, in the past, where they'll spend a little bit longer time embedding with the local team, embedding with the local community to work on their Clearhold build strategy. And again, we're seeing some really good positive results as a result of that too.
But is this something that you hold data on? How many bids come in and how many have been answered and where? What BCUs?
So we could get that data for you. We don't have it to hand now, but we could have a look and come back to
If
you.
If you could pass that data, that'd be really helpful.
I get a sense, and having sat in the tasking meetings, the request for the resource, the TSG resource, always outstrips what we can deliver. Because everyone knows what effect they can deliver, but we'll get you the actual. We'll get you the actual numbers.
I feel like that's the case as well, but it would be good to see the data.
We will get you the numbers, and if that's okay, member. Yes.
Thank you. Assembly Member Small Edwards.
Good morning, Chief Superintendent and Deputy Assistant Commissioner. What specific action has the Met taken to ensure that details and feedback on deployments are shared with BCUs and local policing teams as appropriate?
I'll let comment. I think that's
we've developed an engagement strategy so that it's split into three parts. First is the integrate part. So when we're bid for and we go into a local area, we'll go and work with a local neighbourhood team, start to get to understand the local context and history, find out how TSG can best provide an effect around crime reduction. And that engagement then continues to the deploy phase when they're deployed for 5 or 6 or more weeks in a local area. And then there's an exit stage where the TSG then goes somewhere else. But it's really important that sit down with the local BCUs, understand what went well and why, debrief it, any learning points, what were the outcomes, what were the results, are there any sort of community concerns or other questions that need to be addressed that we can address. And sometimes that involves further sort of follow-up with independent advisory groups or community monitoring groups of those local BCUs as well. So really keen just to have that sort of 3-stage part where we always make sure that when we have been deployed, that we capture any learning, capture the outcomes, any good practice, anything we can share more widely.
Can I just... Oh, sorry, I do beg your pardon, member. No, I was just going to say... So the TSG has its own community reference group, which is made up of members of the community. It's been in existence since I was on the TSG, which was a while ago. So it gets feedback in that way. The TSG reps and some of the senior colleagues are linked into the London Race Action Plan, and they join the reference groups in those areas as well, so they get a sense of the impact the TSG is having or should be having in that area. So that happens as well. In 2024, the TSG attended, I think, 153 events that involved the community. So from an engagement perspective as well, either had stands, were engaging, and quite a few organisations they work with on a regular basis. So we get feedback in that sense as well. On a broader perspective as well, there is so recently we announced the charter, and part of getting to the point in announcement of a charter and our commitments to people in the area of stop and search, we did a large survey and really which gave us some feedback broadly about the organisation and how we should be doing things, but also we picked up specifics around that for specific units as well. So a variety of ways of making sure that we are linked in with communities on a daily basis through local links, but also through organisations that have an interest in the work that policing is doing on their behalf as well. That's a number of ways we do that as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Garbett.
Thank you. This is all very, very interesting. I got slightly distracted thinking about one of my questions later. So I'm going to talk briefly about behaviour and internal culture of the Met. So quoting Baroness Casey reported that, so in context of the local work that the BCU, the TSG do, that the work tends to go back to the BCU and isn't seen to be of a high standard. Obviously, that review was 2 years ago, so I'm wondering if you agree with that and what action's been taken regarding the kind of quality of the work with BCUs.
So I think it's a really important point, a really important question about making sure that whenever anyone, whether you're on the TSG or anywhere else, the quality of your work, quality of your investigations, your professionalism is of the highest standards. And I think any unit will want to raise the level of that because it means better outcomes for Londoners. I think with TSG, again, it comes back to the officers coming onto TSG all come from local boroughs. It comes back to the level of supervision that we have and the level of training that's undertaken. So there's been greater investment over the last couple of years in the level of training in the Met, whether that's leadership training, training in new systems such as Connect, for example. We spend, so on a daily basis, we will check every day in terms of the incidents and the arrests and the cases that the TSG officers have been involved with, so that the base chiefs and the staff there can link in with local boroughs to make sure that the quality of what's happening. And then we have data that comes to us that gives some indication around the quality of those investigations. And we've got a performance framework in place where we can check and look for progress, and we can identify any trends. So that if we don't think, so that we can intervene to make sure that a supervisor can have a conversation with an officer to improve an investigation or to do something. I have a regular contact with the BCU commanders, so if there's any particular issues from that point of view, then we can have that conversation. And it's always a constructive, positive conversation about what usually around the benefits of TSG and other task forces in that local area.
So just to come in to say, is that a lot of stuff that's come in since Casey, or were those conversations and things happening pre-Casey? Has there been a bit of a change since that finding?
Yeah, well, I think there's been more since the Casey review. So, for example, frontline leaders, midline leaders training for our supervisors and leaders is one improvement. Mr. Delacan mentions the new Met for London training that's been rolled out over the last year, which all of our officers have attended. Again, that investment in training shouldn't be underestimated. On TSG or on Task Force specifically, we have supervisor training days where I get the opportunity to speak to all the supervisors across Task Force, and I personally have spoken about the Commissioner and New Met for London, the high standards that we're trying to achieve, my own values and what we're trying to achieve, and engaging supervisors and officers in those conversations has been really, really important. We have, we've invested continually in sort of ongoing development for the teams to have their own training days as well. So any issues around quality of things like investigation or quality of stop and search or any of those matters, we can address those as we go along and see improvements. So absolutely, over the last 2 years, has been a greater investment in the level of training in officers. It's been really, really important.
Thank you. That's good to hear. And I just wanted to talk a bit about kind of morale and the culture within the TSG, because obviously Casey also reported it being a kind of dark corner of the Met and the banter and the bullying that takes place within the TSG, which I understand is particularly toxic for women and women of colour. And I don't know, I've heard many things about people that enjoy kicking doors in and bullying and things like that. And I just wondered, in terms of that finding from Casey saying it's, that banter and bullying, has that been addressed? Would that still be found today?
So touching, for example, on the supervisor training days, I've spent a lot of time talking with supervisors around culture and our high standards and what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, and having those conversations so that we deal with issues that arise. I think a lot of work over the last few years across the whole of the Met around standards and culture also benefits and affects TSG as well. And so, we make sure that, everyone knows the high expectations that in terms of leadership, in terms of behaviour, in terms of conduct, absolutely do not tolerate any of those, and people know that. And I think we are seeing, if you look at our staff survey, people are more confident to challenge behaviour in our staff. Some of our staff survey results, people have more confidence in some of their line managers to deal with issues that are raised. So I think some of that is starting to take effect, which I think is a positive sign. And in any organisation, I think it's important that it's evolving, because we're talking about people's behaviour and trying to raise that bar. And I think alongside that, we've also seen more widely the increase in misconduct and officers leaving the Met, being dismissed from the Met, rooting out people that shouldn't be in policing. And I think, again, that just sets where we are as an organisation trying to achieve those high standards to gain public trust. And that applies to TSG as it does anywhere else.
In terms of, thank you for that. In terms of the staff survey, is that specific? Do you break that down in terms of women and women of colour's experience within the TSG? And when you say it's improving, can you give us a flavour of how much it's moved from obviously being described as that kind of banter and bullying culture? Would you say that would that be the same? Has that shifted significantly? Because that's quite concerning.
Yeah, I haven't got the specific detail for you on the survey, but it was just to sort of share a sort of headline really from what we're seeing sort of recently. But certainly you can come back with more detail on that in the future. But one of the things around the staff survey, I think it's really important to give staff a voice and to listen and to find out what's happening in the organisation to improve. For us as leaders then to start to respond to that, so we're engaging with our officers and staff around how they feel, what they need, particularly around areas such as training, equipment, and of course around culture and values and leadership, really, really important. So that forms part of our approach on the command. And we're doing this all aligned into the new Met's culture plan, so making sure that we're benefiting from the new Culture, Diversity, Inclusion Directorate that's been established. So we work closely with our central colleagues in our own local approach on task force, which again I think is something that's really important to do, to understand what's happening and then be able to work with colleagues to deal with any particular areas or to identify opportunities to improve. So things like the staff survey information is something that we would take into that process. But as I say, I can come back to you in more detail.
Yeah, it'd be really good to see how that's kind of shifted over the last couple of years. Especially
do you mind if I just
breakdowns?
Just add a few things to both your.
Sorry, could I interrupt?
Sorry.
And forgive me, because as always, it's time. We are coming on to the Casey review later on, so there might be things that you might want to add there.
Okay,
if that's okay.
Of course, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And just briefly on how the TSG is deployed to local areas, just feedback I had from being a Dalston ward councillor from the neighbourhood team. They were talking about a deployment that was going to happen on Kingsland Road, all around phone theft. But when I spoke to them about who they were targeting, it turns out it was going to be younger, basically children under the age of 18, so kind of 15, 16, 17-year-olds. So I did have a bit of a concern that the TSG were being deployed and wondered what the kind of aim was, as in just to kind of arrest or, rather than working with the wider community or youth provision, or it just felt like quite not a child-centred safeguarding approach that the Met has. And I just wondered how that child-first safeguarding approach, works in terms of the TSG.
So I think that's been part of the recent new Met for London training that every officer in the Met has received, and again, TSG officers have been attending that training to really understand and really have an opportunity to learn more about child-centred policing and the children's strategy that the Met has recently launched. And I think in this example, I think again, it comes back to working really closely with the local BCUs, why it's so important, because the local BCU will have the relationship with local partners, local youth groups, and be able to work with TSG officers to make sure that, as close as possible, we work together so that, where there are opportunities to refer people to youth services, for example, they're taken up, but that may be something that the BCU is better placed to do in conjunction with what the TSG might do in terms of deploying to deal with a particular crime problem. They have been deployed in Central East BCU recently around the robbery and violence, and been doing a mixture of different types of patrols, and have been sort of making arrests tackling some of the robbery, some of the violence problems that you probably would have seen from a Royal Council point of view. But I think whilst doing that, and that does affect children as much as other people, so I think there's something around making sure that locally, those local arrangements with partners are there, that TSG officers coming into a local area have awareness and have that child-centred awareness in terms of that safeguarding mindset when they're being deployed, as well as the crime focus that they have.
Yeah. Colin, can I just say a number of things? Really, so I hear the members' concern around young people. Just to reassure you, for every planned policing operation, would have to take a particular approach in assessing the problem profile. The problem profile that they're dealing with would look at the location itself, it would look at the perpetrators or the offenders, and it would look at the victims, really. So just to reassure you, we would deploy having known the problem profile and knowing the problem profile in some detail. And we will go, in order to maximise the use of the resources that we have, we will work alongside that problem profile and prioritise our efforts in those areas. Most plans, and I don't know the plan that you're talking about specifically, but most plans that I've worked with, and you'll find most colleagues will work with, will have a number of facets to it. It will have the intervention facet, which you will tend to find a whole variety of partners involved in. It will have a diversion facet to it that allows people who are caught up in crime to be diverted if it's appropriate to do so. You'll have an enforcement facet as well, where you find us most of the time, really. But can I just say something as well? Is that we have spent a lot of time, a great deal of our time, training our officers in our values, in our expectations, in our specific areas around a child-first approach, aligned to our culture plan, aligned to our race action plan. So we are confident that actually we've got a set of principles that allows us to deploy in the right way. So that's the first thing I want to say in relation to your question. I think your question beforehand also talked about, so what is different? What is different now from the case review? There are a lot of things that are different now from the case review. The Commissioner came in on a mandate. He said he would not tolerate racists, misogynists, and people that bring our organisation in disrepute. And we've exited more of those people than we have done in recent times. So that is different. We've now got a culture, diversity and inclusion department that is well staffed and delivering in terms of making sure that we are all aligned to the culture of the organisation, and it's delivering. We've got a London Race Action Plan that is living and live and keeps adapting itself as well. So that's really different. Recently we announced the Charter, and we picked the word announced for a particular reason, that we have announced our commitments to communities and doing things differently, and that includes children as well. So that is really different. We are tracking ourselves against the commitments we made against the New Met for London plan, and you will see very shortly as to how we are doing that, and constantly trying to make sure that we're tracking ourselves against our delivery against that. So that's important. That is different. Our colleagues have, I cannot stress enough that when we were thinking about what we need to train our people in, really culture, values, principles, and how we are going to deploy, because that's what's going to make a difference. That's what London is saying to us. So there are lots of things that are different from when Casey came in. What I'm not saying is that we're perfect, because we're not, really. What I am saying is that we've learned to reflect a lot quicker, adapt a lot quicker, and improve ourselves a lot quicker. That's what's different.
Thank you. I'd be interested to see lots of those things that you mentioned, and thank you for that. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Lord Bailey.
Thank you. Two small questions. You talk. Where are your senior officers in defending the morale of the TSG? I said the TSG because they are at the sharp end, so we'll probably receive quite a few complaints. Are in a world where people often talk about children as if it's impossible for them to be criminals. I have a 15-year-old son. The stories I hear from him, it's children attacking other children. So child-centred policing is a great idea, but it doesn't mean you're not a criminal because just because you're a child. So if you're a TFG officer who has to intervene in that process, where are your senior officers when the political heat comes on? Because that happens a lot. If you speak to rank-and-file officers, certainly if you speak to the Federation, they'll say that you're absent in keeping your officers' morale protected. So where are you in making sure that these police officers are carrying out their job correctly, but also with your support as a day-to-day officer, senior officer who deals with these officers?
We are absolutely aligned with our officers, but that said, so I have. And Colin knows this really, although I'm not day-to-day sitting with the TSG, but I have in recent weeks sat down with TSG officers who have come under scrutiny to have a conversation, talk it through with them, really. I have, on behalf of the organisation, on behalf of the TSG, tried to present a whole picture without making any judgment either way, really, and the officers know that, so sometimes we don't do that in public. We have to have an honest conversation with ourselves as well, so we don't always get it right, really, to your point. Yes, there are children who commit heinous offences, and yes, they should be dealt with, but what we're saying to our officers, you treat people as you find them, really, there are occasions where you have to use force, and you cannot use more force than is absolutely necessary in the moment, in those circumstances. But making sure that the approach we use is the most appropriate approach in the circumstances. So there might be a young person who's caught up in something that they had no knowledge of, in something that they've just found themselves into. Surely it is right that we safeguard them. And on the other hand, there might be a young person who is just out and out bad, and really, whilst they may face the law, but we have to understand actually how did they get to that place that they got to? So we're not absorbing them of responsibility, but we're saying actually they might need the force of the law as well as a diversion of your force as well. So do you see what I mean? So
I understand what you're saying, but the piece I'm leaning to, I think. But politics is defending those children and vulnerable communities. I'm asking who's defending the officers, both internally, which is quite frankly easier for you to do, and externally, publicly, because I speak to a lot of police officers and they feel slightly abandoned. And if you listen to this conversation, it is almost couched in the police are bad, and we know that, and somebody needs to do something about that. I think someone needs to acknowledge the work that these officers are doing to improve the organisation, and also somebody very senior, I'm looking at you two because you happen to be in the room, needs to push back publicly a little. It is not useful for everybody to talk about the police as if they're villains. It simply isn't useful. It makes our communities less safe. And I'm asking a basic question: if when you sit in front of your officers, are you reassuring them that if they do the right thing in the right way, and maybe it looks a bit suspect to the public, you will come out for them publicly? That's the point, because the morale of the police is low largely because of how they view their lack of support from senior officers. Are you going to do something to turn that around?
So we've said to our officers, and we're unequivocal in saying that, if they do the right thing in the right way and they come under scrutiny, if the context allows, then we come out publicly, and we've done that. We've done that quite a few times.
But that's a qualification, if the context allows.
I have to look. What is the point of me sitting here if I am just giving you a response that you want to? I've got to be frank, because it's not as simple as that. So there could be a situation where I want to come out publicly, but actually there is a case ongoing. There's a live case ongoing. I can't do that in that case. Or there was a conduct matter ongoing in that particular case. So my job is to reassure the officers, and so do my senior colleagues, and so does Colin and everyone else. And officers know that we absolutely support. The point of me being here today, and Colin and I being here today, is to actually come and tell you the great work that TSG officers... I was a base chief. I was a TSG officer. So I know the great work that they do. And that's the purpose of being here today. So we support, the TSG deliver a fantastic job for London. They absolutely deliver a fantastic job for London. But I also see a different lens sometimes. When they have a different thing, what is the police if we just see things from one lens at all? We are a reflective organisation. Those officers do a great, fantastic job. There's no doubt in my mind. But we don't always get it right. And we've got to be honest about that as well sometimes.
We're in agreement.
Assemblymember Bailey.
I'm stopping, Chair. I'm going to stop, Chair.
Right, OK, I'm actually going to stop you now. Assemblymember Duval, thank you.
Can I just say thank you, you've both answered the questions this morning. And, I'll declare my interest. I'm a supporter of TSG as an asset, and if it's used properly and appropriately, is useful for keeping people safe in our communities and bringing people to book for their actions, to be honest, their criminal actions. But look, let's just start with that. Let's follow on from Lord Bailey, because I think it's important. And I understood what you were trying to say, because there are processes where you can't comment and come out and show full support in certain circumstances. But there are issues where I think the police don't really help themselves in terms of there are things that you can do to show the public what you face in your day-to-day work, what ordinary police officers face in their day-to-day work. So, I'm taken by the social media issue that shapes some of the actions and perceptions of the TSG. So the 3-minute social media issues, the little encounter where they're intervening and it doesn't look quite right unless you see the full 15, 20 minutes and see the pressures that those officers are facing that lead to that 3 minutes and where it comes to. Now, I get that, but you could show the public clips of body-worn cameras without exposing the other parties of what your officers have to put up to when they're in those intrusive moments of stop and search where it's not going right, not because of police officers who are acting respectfully, but because the other side are not acting respectfully and doing their best, as well as crowds gathering to give their two penneth into those issues. So when is the police going to start thinking about that to show some of the circumstances and the pressures that your officers face on a day-to-day basis? That's my first question. I've got some others, because I want to go back onto some issues that Assemblymember Garbett raised around those issues. Look, we need to remember about Casey. I think it was a very important report, but it was anecdotal. The key issue that we've got to remember, it was the police commenting on the police. Your colleagues in other services were dumping on you for what they thought was good reasons. Now, you're telling us that these things have changed in 2 years, but there are things that I think when you've promised to come back with some more information. So the things I'd like to see is about turnover and exit interviews. So how many people have come into TSG and stayed for such a short while because they don't like the environment? I'd like to know that. If you're telling me that 50-odd members are waiting to queue in, it sounds like a good thing that people are not exiting as fast or not doing that. Now, I get it, that some people it might not be the career choice to go into TSG. They thought it would be, but it wasn't what they thought, and they've seen something better and they want to go out. But I'm saying, I want to know how deep do you go in asking those questions, because sadly the legacy of the past is dominating where you are at the moment. People still view, I was looking at our own internal briefing, it's historical. There's nothing recent, it's historical that we're dealing with. We're talking of events a number of years ago that is shaping our view and some of the questions that we're asking of you. So, there's an issue that I'm picking up, that things probably have moved on, as you said, but I think you need to give us the evidence that actually says that things are moving on. And then lastly, the point that I want to make is that, look, the turnover of staff, the training that goes on, how sustainable can we make that with the future leaders that you're coming? So the tenure issue is a good thing in one aspect. Actually, it's a bad thing, because once people have got the experience and the understanding that they're working in, they're off. They're off and they're gone. So all that issue about are you working closely with the BCUs when you're deployed, I'd like to see how far that goes. Is that really just a surface and an operational issue? We come in because we're doing an operation, or is that a continuous process with those priority boroughs that you are? How seamlessly is it that you understand each other and what each other's roles are? A lot there, Chair, but I don't mind some of it quick, and I don't mind you coming back in writing if you want.
How seamless do we work with BCUs? It's a tried and tested process that's been working for quite a while. It was there when I was there years and years ago. It's been built upon, and it carries on. So it is a fairly seamless process, well tried and tested, and delivers a whole host of results. Really for whatever boroughs they are particularly in, and I'm happy to share results in terms of the number of arrests, the number of knives they get off the streets, and we've got all of that, and we can share that with you. And it is rather impactful and is significant. So that is it's a seamless process with that. In terms of proving to you that so what pardon me if I suggested that we've solved it all. We haven't. Really, so that wasn't the suggestion I was making. I said we'd made good inroads in laying the foundations to make us improve our culture and sustain that improvement for time. So we made a commitment to training. It's not one-off. We're thinking about what we need to train our officers in again, and we're thinking broadly about how we train our officers, and it's mandatory. So they haven't got a choice. They go through it. So we are thinking about what Casey says. We acknowledged everything in the Casey review. Yes, it was our people talking to us and telling us how they'd felt. And it'd be wrong for me to trivialise any of that at all, and I don't intend to. So to be absolutely clear, and all of the things that we are doing is trying to address the recommendations within Casey. So the chart that I've referenced was recommendation 10 within Casey, and it says you have to reset your relationship with communities around stop and search, and that was and there were a whole host of other things with it, recommendations that we have and we can write to you and give you an update on that. In terms of the body-worn video that you asked, that we should start to show people, we're nearly completed our policy on that, and there are exceptional circumstances where we would do that. So yet again, as much as we would like to do that, there are some issues behind that. There are some legal issues that would suggest that we cannot in every circumstance, but in some circumstances we can. We're working through those, and we're working quickly, and hopefully you will see that very shortly. There are issues around if something becomes a complaint or a criminal offence, is it right to then start to... So we have thought about that, and yet again, we've got to be sensitive in the way we do that. But we are definitely thinking about that, and the organisation, board members are quite supportive that we do it. And in recent times, we have tried to do it, and dare I say, people are sometimes not willing to receive the bigger picture sometimes, and that's just the way life is.
Just a final point, Chair. Just saying, people... I hear some criticism about TSG going into some communities. In my constituency, it's about the community asking for extra police resources to come into their communities because they're fed up with what they see as criminality going unchecked, and they want to see more resources going. So I just want to say that. And is there an element of where the Met Police, you do it professionally, and rightly so, it should always, the buck stops finally with you about where that deployment is. But where there are requests and community requests for intervention, what's the Met's thinking of that? Because usually it would be about resources is the real issue. The first stop is with the BCU. But how do you get the BCU commanders to put in requests for that intervention if they feel, no, we're never going to get that support because we're not quite that priority, the tipping point, is it worth us bidding for that resource?
So I think... I always encourage all the BCU commanders to put in bids, and I've been in different circumstances in different boroughs in part of London where it does differ, because we know that there are some parts of London that have more crime than others, and different types of crime. But I think with Task Force more broadly, we've got a lot of options, a lot of different resources that are spread out pretty well across the Met. And so you may be at TSG work in one area, but interceptors may work somewhere else, mounted may get a deployment somewhere else. So we'll have a presence everywhere, and sometimes we just, as been described earlier, in terms of when we're looking at particular problems and how we solve them, that it just depends what is the best effect that we need to achieve alongside the local borough. But yeah, as I say, I'd never discourage my colleagues from asking for our help. We're always here.
Thank you. So come to the end of our first section, which was about the background of the TSG, and we have gone a bit over the time that we had allocated for that, but I think that actually is an indication of how interested people are in the TSG and how little we actually did know about it. So the next section is about the confidence to use powers and training for the TSG. I would ask members if we could just pick up the pace a little bit, please. And I would like to have a 5-minute break for our panel more than anything at the end of this section. So, Assembly Member Hall.
OK, I also have to declare I'm a massive supporter of the TSG. I've spent many, many hours in the back of carriers waiting to swoop and actually witnessed a lot of banter. And they're not going to be saying, this is frightfully difficult where we're going. They're going to be saying what they think. And actually, there's nothing wrong with banter, and I hope it's not completely removed by our government. The committee has heard that public order officers are handing in their public order tickets. That's what we've been told. I know the firearms officers, quite rightfully after the Carver case and the situation with that poor officer, I can understand why they would. But from what I'm gathering from you both this morning, it sounds like they're not handing in their tickets. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Well,
yeah.
That's good. And if you said you're some officers short, how many of your officers are waiting for the wonderful IOPC to make verdicts on any of them? How many of them are not working because of that?
So I haven't got the exact figures here, but the numbers are very low. I'd have to follow up with specific to answer your question.
It would be interesting because the IOPC are just unbelievable.
But the numbers are incredibly low.
Well, that is good, because you don't want officers not doing what they're there for. In an ideal situation, without being too greedy, how many would you like? You've got 589, I think you said something like that. How many would you like? Because I know the boroughs really want you there. They always have done.
Yeah, I think it goes back to our previous responses, really. I think that the resourcing for the TSG has been modelled against demand and the threats that London faces, the capabilities that are required, and how we work with local BCUs. And as you've alluded to, we have a waiting list of people waiting to join us, and we'll recruit more. So that 589 is our BWT at the moment, so we'll work towards that. But at the moment, as I said earlier, we have sufficient resources to deal with all the capabilities that we've described.
OK, although, of course, if you did, then you would never say no to any of the boroughs. Would you? Because I know they wish they had you more. I know that.
I hear the point you're making, and as I said when we started to talk about this, so we're budgeted for 589. We've currently got, I think, 510. We've got 50 on the waiting list to come in, and there's a recruitment process in the pipeline to bridge the gap as well. And really, people aren't sort of leaving the TSG. They want to stay there. There are colleagues who I know have been on the TSG for as long as I've been in the service, really, to be frank. So it is. They are volunteers. They do difficult work. They do very, very good work on behalf of the organisation in London. Yep. They deal with the highest risk subjects across London. They are first through their doors in the early hours of the morning and go back and do it time and time again, really. So we're budgeted for 589, and that's all we've got at the moment. But if we were to get more money, then it will be an organisational decision as to how we prioritise using that money.
OK, and the dogs unit and the horse unit, are they going to stay as? Because they were all under threat with this latest.
So we will carry on having a mounted branch, regardless of tough choices. We'll carry on having a dog support unit, regardless of tough choices. It may be reduced in size, which, like I said to you, in total transparency, there isn't a part of my organisation that has not had to make a tough choice. But that's the reality and honesty. And like Colin has said, we're maximising use of technology to bridge the gap, partners' effort as well alongside us, and actually working more precisely, really understanding the problems that we're dealing with more better and targeting and focusing our efforts where they're most required.
Okay. Do the TSG officers have the confidence to use their powers in public order situations, or are they concerned sometimes?
So we send the TSG to the most difficult jobs, really. So they're quite confident in delivering the effect that we want them to deliver. Really, so they are quite confident in delivering that. That's my experience, and that has always been my experience of how the TSG deliver. Really, so I've not heard anything to the contrary, but I'll let Colin answer that. But I think we're quite confident in the ability of the TSG to deliver the effect that we're asking them to do.
Okay. I mean, they do an awful lot of stop and searches, really good ones. Do they have the confidence now to use those stop and search powers, given that the Mayor's recent report on decriminalisation of cannabis? Are they still quite happy to stop people on the basis that they might be carrying cannabis?
So I make no comment on the report that you suggest, but I will comment on the TSG and confidence in powers, the use of powers, especially in stop and search, really. For a number of reasons, and officers are concerned that actually in using their powers sometimes that it could result in unfair scrutiny, really. So they welcome scrutiny, as I said previously, but what worries them more is the unfair scrutiny that does happen sometimes when the complete picture is not known, and their actions are being scrutinised on the basis of a 30-second clip. So that does worry them, and some of the outcomes in recent times has worried them. But that said, they do a significant number of stop and search. I think about 1,000 a month. Their criminal detection rate, so positive outcome rate, is in the 40s. The average for the organisation is the 30s, really. So hopefully that gives you some confidence that these professional officers are still going about doing their business on behalf of London, really, in order to keep it safe.
I know they are, but I mean, I listened to Len talking about it. I mean, we're absolutely together on this. We agree. The officers are doing their absolute best. They're doing the job properly, and these idiots are taking 2 or 30-second clips, putting the police looking in a very bad light. And we've had some high-profile cases on that. And we would like to be protecting the officers, because they must think twice sometimes about doing some of these things, because instead of being helped by the public, we see videos of police being attacked. And instead of going in to help that police officer, which I would, and I know Len would, they're taking films of it. I mean, so that must affect the confidence of your police doing some of these stop and searches if they think that they're going to get lambasted like those 2 from the TSG did. Look, on that recently.
Yeah, so what officers say to me, and they've said it directly to me, that it is easy to overcome physical attacks on them. The psychological impact of seeing their actions commented on repeatedly is very, 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 very impactful on their mental well-being, really. But I must stress, so what I'm not saying to you today is that we don't want scrutiny, because, of course, that's what's going to make us better. It's the unfairness sometimes that sits behind that scrutiny that worries officers, really, and that's their main concern.
And that's where our questions are coming from, because we know that, and we consider it unfair. One very quick one. I know you said you wouldn't comment on it, but I find it concerning that there's a recommendation for the amendment of Code A of the PACE with the insertion of the smell of cannabis not being sufficient reason to stop and search. Do you have a view on that you could tell us?
So look, our job is to enforce the law. So we will enforce the law as the law is written, and we can do nothing but do that. And we've given our officers some guidance in relation to how to approach the cannabis issue that you suggest. And we've said, look, just the smell alone, that which is our policy. If you need to find some other grounds alongside that as well to be able to sort of conduct a stop and search if it's linked to cannabis. That is our policy.
Okay, I'll leave it there for time reasons. Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Duval.
So where does that leave us when you're stopping someone in a car who happens to smell of alcohol, or you think, following on from alcohol, that drugs may have been involved in terms of that, and those types of stops then? Because on one aspect of criminality in terms of being a car driver under a substance abuse, and another one where I might be walking, well, you said the law's the law, you enforce that. So where does that work?
So we enforce the law. So if you're driving a car and you're under the influence of drink or drugs, not you particularly.
But I'm right, that smell is a determining factor for a police officer to intervene.
Yes, absolutely. If you're driving a car, absolutely. If you're driving a car, that's a totally different. That's totally different ball.
So mixed messages could be difficult in terms of enforcement, or for the officers in terms of understanding which environment they're working in.
But I guess it depends, doesn't it, on the circumstances, and all circumstances are going to be different. Just recalling my time as a PC, regularly stopping cars, the manner of driving sometimes is what stops. Then when you have a conversation with a driver, you realise that maybe they've been drinking, which gives you some reasonable grounds to conduct a breath test. So it just depends, doesn't it, on the different circumstances. There's always going to be a context for every single stop in every single circumstance. And I think what's really impressive, with the level of training and the level of work that TSG officers do, the amount of training they do around stop and search, and the work with community groups, with the engagement that we talked about, is that with 1,000 stop and search searches a month on average, 3,500 deployments in a year working with local BCUs, that their outcome rates average around 44%, which is really positive, because the more it shows that we're being more precise, that the officers have confidence and they're applying their grounds really well.
Just to say, so we are clear as an organisation that actually stop and search is an actual really effective tool in the fight against crime. So we are absolutely clear. We say that to officers. We say it publicly. We say it all of the time. So we're clear on that. When done effectively and when done properly, there's no doubt in my mind that it prevents crime, it saves lives, really. So there's no doubt about that, and we've said that openly. But we're also aware that when done poorly, it has the ability to burn through trust like nothing before. So we make sure that our officers are doing it in the right way. But there is, to be absolutely clear, the amount of weapons it takes off the streets on a day-to-day basis is absolutely phenomenal, really, and it keeps London safe. So, but we have to do it in the right way, so we're clear about that.
Thank you. Assembly Member Best.
Thank you. So we know, obviously, officers in TSG take on the highest level of public order training. Is there any other specific training that officers undertake, and how often is this training refreshed?
So they will train every 5 weeks in relation to public order, so to keep up to date in relation to their tactics and the use of their equipment and the different scenarios that they face. All officers do annual personal safety training and emergency life support training as well. They will also do different types of more advanced scenario type training in their public order training as well, so house entries and so on, dealing with violent individuals, etc. As mentioned before, they are also trained to be a first responder to chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear incidents in London. So when they're Commissioners Reserve, that's part of their responsibility to be that 24-hour 24/7 response to any incidents of that nature, and they have the training and the level of equipment to support them in that role. And they've also undertaken multi-agency exercise training, so when there's a major incident, civil emergency and so on, they've been involved in joint exercising in terms of the response to that. And on top of all the other the training that they do around New Met for London, values, conduct, child centre policing, powers and policy training that they get involved with. So and there'd be more that I haven't listed. There'd be some specific skills that some of the officers have. So some of our officers in TSG are public order medics, so they'll have training for that. They're also public order public safety advisors, so they provide tactical advice. We have a high concentration of officers who are specialists in giving tactical advice to public order commanders. And a number of our sergeants and inspectors are trained in being able to take command roles of public order scenarios as well. So it kind of gives a sense of that Commissioner Reserve and that standing public order capability and readiness that we have available should it be required.
So there's a refresher training every 5 weeks. That's quite short period before you need to go back for a refresher training again. How long is that?
So they'll go back for a day.
So it's a day every 5 weeks. Okay.
And that we can put an open invite if anyone wants to come and see the training. Be very welcome to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that'd be great. Yeah, thank you. When you're looking at these training situations and scenarios, and it's already been raised about the presence of social media and filming, one thing I personally still can't understand is why there's not more threat of arrest for obstructing a police officer in some of these scenarios where police officers are dealing with really difficult circumstance and having a phone shoved in their face and quite aggressive questions asked about what they're doing. Why is that not something in training scenarios that you would use as a tactic, or that you would use as a tactic?
To arrest someone every time? Sorry, I missed the question.
To make clear that the people that are getting involved with cameras and filming quite aggressively are obstructing the police officers.
So if you film us from a distance... I'm
not talking about filming from a distance.
Yeah, so the power of arrest sits with each individual officer, aligned to the law. And it's very... Each circumstance... There would be circumstances where people would... obstruct an officer where they will get arrested, and there are some things where they're going about their business, and they probably won't.
Sorry,
it's
to
really
be more
difficult.
specific, do you run through those scenarios in the training centre, and what de-escalation do you use? Would you ever suggest that as something that officers can use to try and dissuade people from obstructing them? To let them know that if they are obstructing the work of a police officer, yes, they could be arrested. That's a serious offence.
Of course.
They should be arrested.
Of course. If you obstruct the police officer in the course of the execution of their duty, then you are liable to arrest, really. Whether the context in which they're using the phone at that time constitutes obstruction is a matter for the officer to decide at the time. So I hear what you're saying, and I don't disagree with you, but I keep coming back to the point that you've got to take each incident in terms of the context, because it varies. I cannot tell an officer when to arrest or not to arrest someone. What I can say is, here is the law, as you've just described it, and if you think it applies, because they have to justify the arrest at the given time.
It just seems a lot in the social media clips that we often see that, quite frankly, I think the officers are putting up with a lot. And I'd wonder, in the training scenario, what they are told to do in those situations, because it almost seems that they're afraid to act to dissuade somebody from obstructing them.
I would beg to differ with you. So
it's asking what they're told in the training scenario.
I couldn't specifically tell you what they're told in a specific training scenario around that. What I would say to you is that that the power of arrest sits with the officer, and really that to justify and they will execute, they will utilise that power as they see fit. So, look, policing is a complex business, and to try and decipher what an officer will do in each situation, it's very difficult to sit here and try and decipher.
I'm not trying to decipher that. I'm just trying to. This is a situation that seems to come up quite often. So I'm wondering, in the training, what is the advice that officers are given? That was what I was questioning.
Assembly Member Blest, we've just had a very kind open invitation to come and see the training. I, for one, would love to do that. I think your questions are excellent. Perhaps, though, they would be better asked if we can organise that, because the people doing the training can actually answer that.
I just was trying to, I think, make clear that that was the question around what was in the training, not what an individual officer should do in an individual situation.
If we can maybe organise this, those are really good questions to ask the trainers themselves.
Yeah.
Move on to your next question.
I'd welcome going to a training session, but I'd also welcome a written response on that as well, please, if that's possible.
So I'd probably give you a response on that now, really, to be honest. I do not think there is anything in the training session that talks about specifically a mobile phone in someone's face in the way that you've just described it, because it's down to the officer to decide whether they can justify arresting a person for doing a particular thing at a particular time. The things we do train on around the tactics, and the training varies. So we will train on things like how we would deal with arrest a person in a crowd. We will talk about that. We will deal with things like that. We will talk about how we would manage large crowds. We will talk about things relating to escalation and de-escalation around events that have taken place in recent weeks and months, and we will put up a scenario to deal with those things. Really, we will link those circumstances to the law. So, with everything, what legal framework have you used to do or not do something in a sense? So they are event-specific trainings for the TSG. But not as specific as you've just described it. But we can take that away and write back to you if you so wish. But I'm almost certain that we don't talk in the manner that you've just described about phones.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to the new Stop and Search Charter, has that cascaded down to TSG officers?
Has that cascaded down to TSG officers?
And how's it being received?
So it's cascaded across the organisation, will I say. Because before we announced the charter, it went through the new Met for London for Everyone training, where everyone got to see the charter before we announced it, and just to get a sense of what people thought about it. So the charter is not about the legal framework; it's about how we deliver stop and search in a manner that communities have asked us to deliver it, really. And that's what the charter is about. So how has it gone down? It's gone down quite well across the organisation, including the TSG. One of the lead responsible officers who is charged with driving some of the commitments through the TSG, commitments to the charter, is actually one of the chief inspectors on the TSG. So our lead responsible officer for one of the elements is actually from the TSG, and she's working really, really hard driving that through. So, and I've spoken to TSG officers as well, and we took a conversation to them just to ask, just to make sure, because it's not like me and Colin that are going to deliver the commitments on the charter. It's the everyday officer. So we wanted to make sure that we were aligned to what they were thinking. So that's gone down well, but I'll let Colin comment on that.
Yeah, no, I think also if you break down the elements of the charter, and then look at how we conduct our business in terms of our performance, our training, our supervision, the conduct of stop and search, the level of community engagement that we're now involved with. We're taking each of the elements of what's within the charter and weaving it into how the TSG and task force operates on a daily basis. Particularly around areas of getting more involved with local communities before deployments, working more with community monitoring groups in London, with some of the base chiefs now attending more meetings and talking more about the stop and search and the quality of those encounters and what we can refine from that. Obviously, we've touched on training already, so making sure that the quality of our training, and we conduct regular stop and search workshops with TSG officers and local borough officers as well. Again, all aimed at improving the quality of those encounters and improving the working together between local boroughs and BCUs. And then I've touched on earlier about the use of technology, and within the charter talks about how we can use technology better. So not only that is around the use of body-worn video, and we have incredibly high compliance rate with the use of body-worn video, which is really, really important, but also the use of CCTV and other technologies to help us be more precise in our deployments with local communities. So it's something that we've woven into how Task Force operates across all of our areas.
Okay, if I'm on this, I mean, been in politics since 2014, and talk of stop and search with the Met and improving stop and search with the Met has been conversations I've had since then, and the exact language you use, the exact narrative there, I don't think has changed in those 10 years. I mean, is there anything from the Charter that you would point to as a real kind of fundamental change?
So I was trying to be succinct, and so if I can talk through some changes. So Casey said a number of things, but she said we needed to reset our relationship with our communities around stop and search. But she also did say in there that in the review that we treat engagement in a real perfunctory way, as I think is what she said in there. So how we engaged to get to the point of the Charter was very, very different, really. We didn't write a single thing down. We started engagement from scratch. We had 5 questions when we brought people into NSY to have a conversation with us, and one of those questions was, should we have a charter at all? What's it going to do? What would you like to be in it if we do have one? We then embarked on a journey across a number of schools. We had an online session, a number of online sessions, not just one.
Sorry, we have gone through I know very well the engagement.
Yeah, okay.
Just with a focus on time, could you just make a change as a result of the Charter?
So the engagement was part of the change. How we engaged was part of the change. So you just said we're doing the same things, but the engagement was part of the change. The journey to get to this point was part of the change. Do it differently and do it. The words you see in the Charter, in terms of, they are community expectations of us. So they're the words of the community. What we have done behind that is that we've got 5 lead responsible officers who are driving the changes against the 8 commitments that we've just talked about. Training, we're starting to pull together the training plans that are going to look towards the future. That is going to be different, which is not about legality of stop and search. It's about how we do stop and search, the procedure justice way. So that is different. Part of training is understanding cultures and history. So cultural competence is different, really. Stop and search, I talked about complaints in stop and search. We're developing something, and you'll see that very soon, in terms of how complaints can be received differently and more expeditiously in a manner that will give public some confidence. And that's one of the lead responsible officers is developing that already. How we're going to scrutinise elements of the Charter is different. So there are lots of things, and I'm more than happy to write to you and share with you the things that we've done to date. So we haven't just waited, and the things that that are in train to be done, if that helps.
Yeah, and I do mean in the kindest way possible. Those are the sorts of ambitions that have been stated for a long time, and so I think with the new Charter, I know it's received a lot of perhaps not positive feedback from opponents of stop and search, and those, myself included, in favour of stop and search, also are failing really to see. So I think a lot obviously will come out through the independent evaluation and monitoring, perhaps.
Yeah.
But right now, some of they just, you may recognise those are concepts that have been floated a lot. So it would be interesting, I think, to see the change that actually having those lead officers, perhaps, and some of those systems make.
Can I come back on that, really, to be honest? So we've been really honest about the Charter. We'd never suggested for 1 minute that it will be a difference overnight. So it's not. It's a real journey. So and even in articulating the Charter, we are asking communities to walk this journey, this maturity matrix of a journey with us. So for example, if I say we're going to train all our officers in procedural justice training, that's not going to happen overnight. It's going to happen over a period of time. And so what we have also done, which is different as well, is behind all of those commitments are a set of metrics that we can report again, which will give us the outcomes that we're looking for. So what's going to be different for the officers, the supervisors, the public and young people? So we've articulated what the outcomes should be and the metrics that will lead towards that. So I hear what you're saying, but it's definitely I agree, Member, that it's not going to change overnight, but it will change in due course because we are committed to delivering this.
Okay, and the final question from me, just, do you think the Charter puts enough emphasis on the respect that officers should be receiving in interactions, as well as enough emphasis on the fact that stop and search is the primary? There's 8 commitments there, not one of them mentions safety of the public. Is it clear enough that stop and search is to keep the public safe, and the reason for any stop should be to keep somebody or the public safe?
Member, I was trying to articulate how we got to this point here. The community expectations are not my expectations. We went out and asked the community. Those expectations were written by the community members, and those expectations are what Londoners suggested they wanted in there. So they're not my words. We have just said we will meet them. We will meet those commitments, those expectations, and that's why we've made those commitments. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. I think a charter is a contract between. This charter should be a contract almost between the police and the public. And I think to ask for a level of respect for the police and encounters, and to hone in on the fact that every stop and search, the paramount reason for that is to keep the public safe. I think those are still important things as part of the Charter.
I don't disagree. I absolutely don't disagree with you, but I'm also mindful of our position, the position we're in really at the moment. So we were trying to respond to what our communities want of us, and dare I say, a vast majority of the community does respect policing, really, which has been my experience. There are only a few difficult people that we come across, so I don't disagree with your
yeah. Of course, the vast majority of the public respect the police, and the vast majority of police officers respect the
Absolutely.
public, and the vast majority of this, and so that's why I think in the Charter that should have all been recognised, but I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Assembly Member Garbers.
Thank you. And just to make a quick comment in support of what you were saying earlier about the stop and search on the basis of smell of cannabis alone, obviously it came from the Inspectorate, the IOPC and the College of Policing before this, and this is just putting it into the Code of Practice. So I just wanted to make it clear that it's something that's been spoken about for a really long time. So my question is about just specifically, and probably a short answer, just about, do TSG officers receive training on unconscious bias, and how do you ensure that that's undertaken and refreshed? Is it part of the training?
So all our officers undertake training around issues around unconscious bias and discrimination. I can't give you a specific sort of numbers and timelines when perhaps that's something we can follow up on. But it is something that's live for us and sort of training and conversations, and goes back to how we want to make sure that our officers act and behave within our values and our guiding principles. And we've gone through a period of extensive training through our new Met London training that covers a lot of those key areas and issues, which include unconscious bias.
Great, and I know we're going to do some more on the training, so that would be great to hear. And just briefly, I know we've talked a lot about kind of the activity of the TSG. How do you measure the long-term impact of the activity that the TSG has had? Because obviously there's a principle of policing that you can't just measure success based on activity, so like arrests and things. Like, how do you... Because it'd be really good to see the kind of longer-term impact of those interventions.
So again, I think part of that is the TSG work in conjunction with the local BCU. So part of the long-term outcome is reducing and dealing with the reasons why they're deployed. So we will look at if we're deployed into an area to reduce robbery, has robbery reduced during the time that we've been there? We'll look at the output. So we've talked about arrests and various interventions that they do, but ultimately, is crime coming down? Are offenders being removed from the streets and keeping people safe? And I think a key one is trust and confidence in policing increasing. And I think if we reduce crime, increase our trust, they're the two key measures in sort of defining the success of TSG. And I think we can see through the deployments, the activities they do on a daily basis, and some of the reductions we're seeing in some of the areas where they're being deployed, that they are having that effect alongside our local BCUs, local partners and local communities that are involved in that.
Great. It'd be good to see that kind of long term as well, like over kind of years. But yeah, we can maybe pick that up. Thank you.
Thank you. Brilliant timing there, Assemblymember Garbett. It is now 5 to 12. I'm going to take a 5-minute break, more than anything to give our panellists a break. And could everyone be back here at 12 o'clock, please? Thank you. Okay, thank you. So we're now moving on to our next section, which is about vetting, complaints and the Casey review. We have touched on some of this over a very interesting first half, and if the questions, if you've answered, if you've answered this question before, if the question's been asked, please don't do it again, because we do want to get through all the rest of the really interesting questions that we've got. So, Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. This is regarding vetting, particularly given the additional responsibilities that the TSG has. And it's to ask whether TSG officers undergo any additional vetting before being assigned to the TSG, and if so, what additional vetting do they receive?
So at the moment, they have the same vetting as any officer on a borough, so they would have no additional special vetting to join the TSG. Although it's really important, vetting is refreshed, and with the new legislation that's changed, important that all officers maintain their vetting status throughout their careers. And so that leads back into some of the previous answers we've talked about in terms of training and values and culture and so on. So, but no, they don't require any additional vetting for those roles.
Given that we heard earlier that during the Olympics, for example, some TSG officers were deployed as firearms officers, do you not think that there should be a higher standard of vetting for officers within this particular cohort?
Well, I think the officers as they are now are, as I say, they're drawn from the boroughs. They're operationally deployed in local communities in similar ways to borough officers are. So I think having parity around the level of vetting is absolutely appropriate. I think officers go into different roles in their careers, so you might find that some TSG officers have a high level of vetting depending on additional roles they may have, but as a standard benchmark in terms of the vetting they do have, then they have the sufficient vetting that's required at the moment. But as I say, some roles within policing do require a high level, but it's role dependent in terms of what they're doing. Yeah,
I was just wondering whether, given the high profile and given the concerns which we've heard recently, and given the fact that the TSG was formed out of the SPG years ago, but perceptions still linger. So still no need for a higher level? I mean, these are the commissioners, well, you didn't say crack troops, but pretty much.
So the TSG was not formed out of the SPG. The SPG was disbanded and we formed the TSG. So in order to join the TSG, you have to go through. So for some units, you can just be transferred into those units from workforce deployment. But in order to join the TSG, you have to go through a selection process. So although that is not vetting in terms of background vetting, it is also a way of actually seeing whether these officers are going to be suitable for the kind of work that we're putting them through. And really, so you don't just get transferred into the TSG. You have to apply, go through a rigorous selection process, and then if you are successful, then you get to join. So there's a
second stage.
There's a second stage. Really.
Just on a connected point, what's the procedure then if somebody has a complaint against a TSG officer? Is it the standard complaints procedures as would apply to any officer, or is there a specific, again, given the profile, a fast-track complaints procedure or anything like that?
No, so it's the same. It's the same complaints procedure, and I think it's right that it is so, because otherwise it is inconsistent, and how we couldn't justify having a separate complaints procedure. So there are sometimes we expedite complaints fairly quickly, but for those are for exceptional circumstances for specific reasons. But no, it's the same complaints procedure that you would have for any other officer.
Okay, and those complaints, would you suggest, are dealt with in exactly the same way, so that with the same expediency, the same fairness, the same level of scrutiny?
Yes, I would say that is absolutely correct.
Excellent. Could I just quickly going back to the vetting, as I did have a supplementary I wish to add, and I was caught up in the moment. So, so in terms of the people who apply to the TSG, is there a minimum level of experience required, or could somebody join the Met, 6 months ago, and then suddenly think, I'd like to apply to join the TSG?
So you would have had to have completed your probationary period, and that's in pretty much all circumstances on a borough, and then undertaken level 2 public order training, or at least been in the process of taking level 2 public order training, and then, as Mr. Delican has talked about, the selection and process is quite rigorous in terms of not just interview, but also in terms of assessing people's abilities and things like stop and search. We also have a buddy scheme, and so officers undertake a short attachment with TSG, because I think it's important that officers really understand the role, the importance of it, the type of activities that that they can get involved with, and particularly where we're trying to improve representation as well within the TSG. That's been proved really effective. So there's quite a few steps for that recruitment into TSG, which culminates in an interview and, as I say, some role play exercises which are assessed around someone's suitability, and then from that moment, once they've been selected, join the waiting list that we currently have to come and join us.
How long is the waiting list?
So there's not really a length of time, but in terms of numbers, we've got about between 40 and 50 at the moment waiting to join us.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier that vetting is refreshed after an ongoing period.
Every 10 years, I think it is.
Every 10 years?
Yeah, from top of my... Yeah,
that's what it is now, but I think it's slightly changed. I can't remember what the actual...
But if your role changes, you'd have to refresh to the next level up of vetting, for example.
OK, so if somebody was vetted, say, 1 year ago, and they weren't due to be re-vetted again for another 10, actually, ignore those numbers, but you don't think that it might be worthwhile having the vetting kick in, the refresh, the minute that they are accepted on or are about to be accepted on?
Yeah, so the new vetting procedures, which I don't know, I must confess I don't know off the top of my head, will address the concern that, because we also identify that actually it doesn't make sense. If you are vetted at a point in time in year one, there could be a lot of stuff in between year 1 and year 10. Yeah. That has done, and which we should have apprehended, which is what gets us into trouble. I think the new vetting procedures will seek to correct that, and there will be triggers in the course of those 10 years that will trigger a revetting or looking at your vetting level and vetting status, which will give us a sense of what you've done in the last sort of 12 months rather than wait till 12 years.
That sounds great. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, and thank you very much. This has been very useful so far. I'd be very happy if you don't have these figures to hand, and also may not wish to declare them publicly if you wrote to us afterwards. But I was wondering how did you say current 510 officers breaks down in terms of gender balance, and also the heritage, the ethnic mix of the officers, because I think it's quite important. We've been talking a lot about trust and confidence, and now we've moved on to talking about vetting, and obviously the big interest in vetting has come out because of various things that have happened, and I think it's important that the TSG, along with the rest of the police, represents Londoners who obviously come from a very wide range of backgrounds and are men and women, and I just wondered if you have those figures, you could just say them if you feel comfortable with that, or I'm very happy to receive them afterwards.
So for task force overall, which includes TSG, which makes up the majority, about 20% of officers are women, and about 12% are from ethnic minorities. I think there's more that we need to be doing around that. So our recruitment is geared around increasing the number of women, for example, number of people from ethnic minorities in task force itself. The buddy scheme is a good example of how we're trying to achieve that. We work closely with colleagues in delivering the London Race Action Plan and with the Culture, Diversity Inclusion Directorate to look at good practice and things that we can do in that area. And there is a wider piece of work around increasing the number of women in public order more generally as well. So we're working closely with that team, looking at how we can increase the number of women in public order policing too. So, yeah, accept that there's a baseline and a way to go, but that's what we're striving for, to improve our representation for the reasons that you've just outlined.
Yeah, it's a really good way to increase trust and confidence. I see that the figures that you've just given, I mean, clearly 20% of Londoners are not women. It's about 50%, and 12% of Londoners are not from a range of ethnic minority backgrounds. It is much higher than that. So obviously I would be hoping that you would have that as a goal. It would also be interesting, I think, for us to have the breakdown for the TSG, because that's what we're talking about this morning, and I think you've just given the figures for overall MO7. Is that, have I got the right terminology?
Yeah.
All these strange names. But that would be really handy if you could maybe send that to us afterwards. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Garbett.
Thank you. Just to talk, pick up on something that you said earlier around the special training that officers receive. I understand that sometimes in misconduct allegations, these are then used as justifications for not suspending high-ranking officers. And obviously, if they're subjected to things like VORG offences, that means that they're still being exposed to the public. So I just wondered what's being done to address that.
Go on.
Sorry, I don't recognise what you've just... Do you mind just repeating the question? So
Yeah,
I can
so
be
the special
absolutely clear?
trainings like the tactical advisors and the medics and those things that you said that the TSG officers receive a special training, then if there is a misconduct allegation made against that officer, the fact that they've got that training is often used as a reason to keep them as a serving officer while the misconduct allegation is ongoing. And obviously that means that if it's a violence against women and girls complaint or something that's quite serious, they're still going to be exposed to the public.
So the decision to either restrict or suspend an officer does not necessarily lie within the unit in which that officer is actually deployed. Depending on the severity or the seriousness of the allegation against the officer, will determine where the assessment of severity is taken and then decide on restrictions or suspension. If it is a very serious allegation, then it's a likelihood is that the Department of Professional Standards, who are independent of the officer's unit or operational command unit, will take that decision out of the hands of the local OCU and make a decision. Yes, it is right that in the interim sometimes there is local restrictions that could be placed pending a decision from a centre on that. But those are, yet again, they are individual decisions taken on the basis of the context of what is being alleged, really. So, and I don't think one of the reasons, and I'm quite clear on this, one of the reasons why we would keep people who have done heinous things sometimes would be on the fact that they have got what might be deemed to be a specialist role. It's not.
I think the terms that it's like an operational need that I've. Yeah, that would kind of put them in a different category to another officer.
Not from my knowledge, and that isn't right. If the allegation is that serious that they need to be restricted or taken out of the operation chain in the interest of public safety or public confidence, then we should do so, and that's what we do.
Of course. That's why I was quite concerned. Obviously, that might be of difference, but maybe I can follow up with you afterwards with any specifics.
That'd be good to know.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Assemblymember Small-Edwards.
Why does the Met only publish complaints at MO7 task force level rather than at TSG unit level?
To be honest, I don't know the specific answer to the question why. So in terms of that, what's on the public dashboard in terms of what you can see, I think most commands data is published at that BCU or OCU level. There'll be a number of reasons for that. I'd probably have to follow up with a written specific answer to that question. But obviously that's the data we currently publish. But yeah, I'll have to get back to you on that one.
Thank you very much for that.
Do you think it'll be helpful at a unit level? What would that give give the public more confidence? I just asked the question because
Yeah, I think I just wanted to hear kind of your rationale for doing it that way. I don't know whether it would or not, but yeah, if you could let me know in writing why you think it's potentially best to do it.
I think some of that, and I surmise, but we will do that in writing, is around making sure that actually we. Data protection is one of the reasons why, because the more granular you get, the more likelihood you are able to identify not just the officer, but possibly the person who has made the allegation as well. And sometimes that's not the right thing to do.
Thank you for that. What lessons have been learnt by the TSG following the case of Bianca Williams and Ricardo dos Santos?
So I think we touched on it earlier around officer confidence in terms of being able to use their powers, and I think cases such as that have an effect on officer confidence in using their powers. We've seen a return on some of that confidence as well, which is really encouraging, and so on. So I think partly it's around that officer confidence and what those incidents can have an effect. I think we've looked more at how we support officers. There's a point made earlier around how we support officers going through or facing public scrutiny in that way. So I think there's more that we have been doing around the welfare and well-being of officers that are facing misconduct or facing those kind of issues around their welfare, mental well-being, and wider support that can be made available. I think also it's also looking at how we operate and work with local BCUs, so just more widely, not necessarily specific to the case, but I think reflecting on trying to be more precise and using technology and using other things that are available to us to build that confidence and think about how we can use various tools and intelligence and information to inform stop and search, but that's more widely rather than specifically to the case. So I think there's, I think a lot of the work we've been doing over certainly the last 12 months has been around how we can support more officers with their well-being and welfare that are facing misconduct. So I think that's really, really important to do that. And then obviously how we think about how we deploy, how we ensure that we have
look,
all the tools available to us to sort of do what we need to do.
I'm just going to say, I said at the very top of this conversation, I wanted you and members of the public who are watching, I said, look, we are an absolutely reflective organisation. We will stop, take a step back with every job that we deal with, whether it goes well or not. We will debrief and to assure you, the officers have stepped back and they have to debrief that. I don't think it's right for me to start to talk in detail about that. But just to reassure you, I will talk through the process that happens when the TSG deploy. So when the TSG deploy to an event or an incident or in the capacity of being the Commissioner's Reserve, what happens is they have to do a return of work every day. Okay? They will get off their buses towards the end of their shift. They will go back to their bases and they will sit down with their inspector. Each one of those buses has a sergeant and 6 colleagues on the bus, sometimes 7, but 6 most of the time. And the inspector will get them together. There are 3 buses that always work together. The inspectors will get them together and they will talk through elements of their day, including things that have gone well, through things that haven't gone well. They will go into some detail of events that haven't gone too well, and they will debrief. They will share that debrief with their base chief, and really in a form of a document, a written log. The debrief document, once it goes to the written log, the chief will then decide whether there is lessons within that log to be learnt for the whole of the TSG or for that specific area, and then cascade that as well. So just to reassure you, we do take a step back, but I wouldn't want to comment specifically on that particular case because it is one that has caught the attention of the public and it's not right to that. But just to reassure you that we take a step back and we reflect all the time on whatever job we do.
And obviously you mentioned that the case was quite high profile, but when there are those kind of high profile cases that sometimes do undermine trust amongst the public, how can you respond and ensure that that public trust maintains there despite criticism in the media and etc.?
Yeah, but that case has also been through a number of processes and there are processes to deal with that. And I don't think it's right for me to sit here and start to go and undo all of that process again. So I'd say, look, it's been through a process. We've taken a step back and as we would do most cases and reflect.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We are now moving on to our final section, which is about community scrutiny. So I'm going to ask Assembly Member Cooper to start, please.
OK, I'm now completely confused. I thought we were going to start with you and then come to me. But, I mean, obviously, I've just asked the question about, the need for TSG to reflect Londoners, and I'm hoping, well, it might even be better than 20% and 12.5%, because obviously that's quite a low figure. But how is the TSG responding to the issues that are raised by the community reference group, which may include that and obviously includes other things?
So I think one of the things we're continually keen to do is to ensure that we engage with local communities at a local level, so work with the local boroughs. So I think that connection with local IEGs, local community monitoring groups, who scrutinise Stop and Search, for example, and having officers attend those meetings and be available to answer questions and talk about Stop and Search, for example, again, really important. And that feedback from those groups back into Task Force and back into TSG is also really important, particularly prior to deployment, where it's, as we've talked about before, it's important for officers to understand the context and challenges and history of where they're policing, and also to listen to some of the local voices, local community groups and others who are talking about what it's like to live and in those areas and the reasons why it's important for officers to be there. I think it also just gives an opportunity for the public and for members of those particular groups, and also the range of other engagement events that the TSG attend, to have an influence and ask questions about how TSG operates, and for TSG to be able to sort of lift the lids and talk about the things that they do and why they do it. So it's a two-way exchange, which I think is really beneficial from both sides in building those links. Recent examples, certainly over the last sort of few months, been into local sixth form colleges, been working with various community-based organisations, been attending IAG and CMG meetings, heavily involved in some of the Stop and Search Charter engagement and consultation process. So as far as we possibly can, always really, really important to involve the public in how we police and how that influences us. Always more to do, but I think, as mentioned before, 153 events last year, and we're continually increasing the number of events we're trying to do this year. A shameless plug, we have an open day at Wapping Police Station on the 30th of August, where there'll be TSG and other units there as well. But those opportunities where we can interact with the public, really important. And then that will then help improve, where we haven't got representation yet, it helps us improve the knowledge and the cultural competence that we talked about earlier. And build trust.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I mean, not all boroughs have regular meetings of monitoring groups or hate crime forums or the plural of forum, is it forums or fora? Anyway, but they do have regular meetings of their Safer Neighbourhood Board, where the borough commander and the superintendents come together with representatives from the Safer Neighbourhood teams, and the panels, which should have members of the public rather than specific groups of people who have neighbourhood concerns all get brought together. I don't think I've ever heard the TSG has attended either of the Safer Neighbourhood Boards in my area. Is that something that happens at all elsewhere?
Yeah, it can happen. I know also that the local borough neighbourhood superintendents also run quarterly New Met for London events talking about crime in the local areas, and the TSG attend those. So it may be something that's specific to the local borough, but if the BCU commander or the superintendents want us to come along to one of those meetings, or if you raise that with your superintendent, and because there's a particular need to talk to TSG, happily to come along, and one of our team can do that. But because for us, I think it's about how we just continually get out into the local communities, into the boroughs, talk about what we do, listen to local concerns, and, as I say, shapes and influence our approach. At the same time, raise the profile of what TSG does and the benefit it brings to neighbourhood policing and community crime fighting.
So how is the community reference group, how does it allow communities a clear and easily accessible route to feedback on interactions with TSG officers?
So our reference group meets quarterly, so it has an opportunity for, and most of the members are drawn from existing borough-based groups, which is good because it maintains that link, which is important. And so we're able to discuss a range of topics. We have TSG officers attend, and we also, like I've mentioned earlier, an open invite to come and see TSG training or go on ride-alongs. I know members have been on ride-alongs with TSG before as well. So it gives those opportunities to sort of have those conversations, see how we operate up close, exchange of information and views and understanding. And it's something that, on the Met website, for example, members of the public can apply to join a ride-along as well. So we're keen to promote that level of engagement as far as we can.
Apply to join a ride-along, but perhaps not to come and do public ordered policing. I would hope not, anyway.
Yeah.
The terms of reference for the TSG Community Reference Group, is that something you'd be able to share with us? Is that something that should be made publicly available?
Yeah, I've got no reason why we can't share that with the group, and we can follow that up with writing afterwards. I think it's at its heart, its principle is around how to involve the community more in how we police. I think it's its main purpose, and that platform and opportunity for community groups and representatives to ask those questions and to talk about current issues, not just in TSG but across the whole of task force, which is important.
So you'd have no problem with putting the terms of reference and even the membership onto the Met's website, just for transparency?
We might not be able to put the membership on the website.
OK, not the membership.
We will have a look and see whether we can do it. Because sometimes people engage with us in a way that they don't want to be publicised and engaged. So we will have to go back and check with them before we do that. So we will write back to you with an answer regarding both. One, can we publish the terms of reference, which I'm sort of in agreement with Colleen that we should be able to tell people the terms of reference of a reference group. But in terms of publicising people's names, I think we've got to be a bit more cautious in that.
I understand that. That's why I raised the question about whether or not it was something that you could publish on the website, and I agree that they are two different things, and hopefully we can get the terms of reference onto the website, if not the membership. Do you think there would be any value in publishing online a community dashboard listing TSG community interactions and outcomes? Perhaps on a monthly basis is very frequent, but maybe on a quarterly basis if the community reference group meets on a quarterly basis. Presumably you provide it with some details with the aim of increasing that community confidence.
Yes, it's certainly something we can take back. I think we're always keen, and again we talked about earlier, to promote the work of the TSG and what happens, and that includes community events, operations and other details that we're able to share. So, certainly something we will take back.
I think we're circling back to some points that Assembly Member Duval made very eloquently at least an hour ago now about, you know, you're not really doing yourself a favour in one sense by not publicising your visibility at community events and improving people's understanding of what you're doing and where you're going, and your role at the New Met for London events and all of those sorts of things. I think, you know, as well as being visibly representational of London, you know, a point that I've made now, I think that's really important, because then people can see that, you know, the TSG isn't a sort of shadowy organisation that suddenly springs out of nowhere and has nothing to do with local officers or local communities. And I think it's, you know, it's both of those aspects, isn't it, of working together with local teams of officers, but also working together with local communities. And if we can't see that you're doing it, how will we know that you are?
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. I think sometimes as well, though, you know, where we are at community events and community meetings, they do get publicised locally, they are felt locally. And I've had recent examples where someone's here been to a community event and got a round of applause because of some of the work they've been doing in a local area. I had an email about some officers that were approached in the street by a local group because they're patrolling a particular estate. So I think sometimes some of that happens out of sight because they're just normal, regular community interactions, which are really, really important because they're the things that help to build trust as well. But certainly it's a wider point about how we can publicise more of what we do more widely is certainly something that we can take back, and certainly something that we've been thinking about how we can improve that public engagement more widely.
I mean, if part of the New Met for London is about increasing confidence, surely this has to be a good way of doing it.
Yeah.
OK,
yeah,
thank you, Chair.
I disagree with that.
Thank you. Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you. Just following on from that, I get and I fully support the comments regarding the publicising of showcase events. But there was a FOI request entitled Information about the TSG. I don't have the date of it, unfortunately, where deployment details for the TSG were requested, and the response was, if borough deployment data on the borough reserve shift, along with the shifts the TSG undertake, were released into the public domain, there could potentially be substantial harm to the police service, as it could inhibit its ability to fulfil its core functions. Now, I quite understand that you wouldn't be able to publish advance details regarding deployment, but surely retrospective publication should be achievable. And this idea of, you know, not responding to FOIs or this is something that we can't discuss, does that not damage public faith in this organisation?
I think we've
been here today. We've told you where we've been.
Oh no, I appreciate that. But
so we're. Look, I don't know. I know the date. I don't know the date of the FOIA, yeah. But if you ask us where have we been in the last sort of 2 months, I think I have data to tell you where we've been and what results we've achieved. And to the member's point, that helps serve to build confidence in what we do. And so I'm quite content to give you a sense of where we have been. I won't give you a sense of where we are going, but I can give you a sense of where we've been.
Sometimes, though, it's the case that it's two parts of the same organisation don't necessarily interact well. So your FOI team might think they're doing exactly the right thing by not releasing the data. If I could just warm to the point. Yeah. They may think they're doing the right thing by not releasing the data, whereas you actually want them to release the data so that you can be more transparent.
So in the interest of transparency, which you've just mentioned, so it's people like me who sign off whether we agree to the FOIA response or not. So it does come through my desk. It's not down to them. So I wouldn't want you to sort of think that it's down to the FOIA team. It's probably people like me who say, and I cannot recall signing off that one that you say, so it might be well dated.
It may be an out-of-date one, but if we can get it for future use, then, because whilst I'm very grateful that you're both here today, and we all are, the idea that the majority of Londoners are sat glued to their screens at the moment is perhaps not as much as we would wish. Where am I going next? OK, so the other question is, how is the use of integrate, deploy and exit being monitored, and what impact has it had to date?
So we monitor it in terms of understanding the level of engagement events that were taking place. we track it through corporate tasking so it aligns with the taskings and deployments that we are given. We follow up with the local BCUs and capture the feedback from the local BCUs. I think as a sort of three-stage model, if you like, so far it's proved effective in helping to integrate TSG and build those links with local communities, local borough officers. I think what we haven't done is formally evaluated it, for example. However, in terms of sort of informal feedback, either through tasking or through working closely with the boroughs or through feedback from the community reference group and other community groups that we've been with the local BCU, we've been receiving some really positive feedback. So anecdotally, it's achieving its purpose in supporting those deployments and trying to drive and improve the quality of the work that TSG do in the local area.
Will you be sort of closing the loop so that the reference group has fed into this and now you're doing the work? Will you be reporting back with the findings of the review to the community?
So as I say, what we haven't done, we haven't, and at the moment we've got no plans to do a formal evaluation or review of that strategy. What we tend to do is, as I said, for each deployment, we'll look at each deployment in itself and then look at the feedback loop that we get, as you described, from each deployment. And that's how we then just capture any learning, anything that needs to maybe be brought into training or maybe shared more widely across the command. Sometimes we share some of the feedback that we get across the command with weekly messages and through training days, or just with the individual units. In terms of what's coming back. And likewise, when we report back in terms of the outcomes of corporate tasking, we're able to share any feedback corporately that way too.
Okay. And how long do you think you'll continue with the operation before you do a formal review? I'm not asking you to commit to a date.
No, but all I said, each tasking is reviewed on a monthly basis as a regular review. So each month we'll be reviewing, but we also have daily and weekly meetings where we review all of our activity across Task Force and TSG.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So we've now come to the end of what I thought was an excellent session about the discussion on the TSG. I'd like to thank the panel for your really in-depth answers, and they've answered a lot of questions that people have had in their minds, and for your honesty as well. And I think there's a level of humility there that I certainly felt